Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we are asking a question that every English learner has asked themselves at some point, usually at around 2 in the morning after staring at a grammar rule that makes absolutely no sense. The question is, why is English so confusing?
And I want to start by saying something important. If you have ever felt that English is completely irrational, that the rules are random, that it was designed specifically to confuse people, you are not imagining it. English genuinely is one of the more complicated languages to learn as a foreigner, and today we are going to explain exactly why.
But here's the other thing we want to say. Understanding why English is confusing actually makes it less confusing. When you know the reason a rule exists or the reason a word behaves the way it does, it stops feeling random. It starts to make sense historically and logically, and that changes how you feel about learning it.
So let us go through the real reasons why English is so hard, and there are many.
The first and probably biggest reason is that English is a hybrid language. It did not come from one source. It absorbed vocabulary and grammar from many different languages over many centuries, and it kept different rules from each one.
English is fundamentally a Germanic language. Old English, the language spoken in England over 1,000 years ago, is part of the Germanic family. Words like water, house, mother, father, hand, love, go, come, eat, sleep, these are all from the Germanic roots.
But then something happened. The Normans invaded England in 1066. They spoke French. And for the next 300 years, French was the language of the English court, the government, the law, and the church. Ordinary people still spoke English, but the ruling class spoke French.
So English absorbed an enormous amount of French vocabulary. Words like government, parliament, justice, restaurant, beauty, fashion, color, judge, prison, army. These all came from French.
And French itself came from Latin, so English also absorbed vast amounts of Latin, both directly through French and later through the Renaissance when scholars deliberately imported Latin and Greek words into English for science, medicine, and philosophy.
Words like science, education, evolution, phenomenon, democracy, hypothesis, these are all Latin or Greek in origin.
So, today, English has 3 main layers of vocabulary: Germanic for everyday basic words, French for law, government, art, and food, Latin and Greek for science, medicine, and formal concepts.
And each layer often kept its own spelling rules, its own pronunciation rules, and its own patterns. That's why English spelling and pronunciation seem so inconsistent. It's because different parts of the vocabulary follow different historical rules.
For example, in Germanic-rooted words, the GH was once pronounced. Light, night, thought, through. That sound disappeared from pronunciation, but the spelling stayed. So now you have silent letters that confuse everyone.
But in words that came through French, the spelling is much more phonetic in the French way. Words like unique, technique, machine, police, different rules because they came from a different language.
This is why in English you have knife with a silent K, because in Old English it was pronounced with a K sound. Psalm with a silent P from Greek. Debt with a silent B inserted by scholars trying to make it look more Latin. Honest with a silent H because of French influence.
The language did not decide these things. History decided them, and English kept all the historical spellings even as the pronunciation evolved.
The third major reason English is confusing is irregular verbs. Most languages have irregular verbs, but English has a lot of them, and they follow no single obvious pattern.
Go becomes went, not goed. Went actually comes from a completely different Old English verb. The two verbs merged, and one provided the present and one provided the past.
See becomes saw. Take becomes took. Eat becomes ate. Think becomes thought. Buy becomes bought. Catch becomes caught. Teach becomes taught.
And then you have verbs that are the same in all forms. Hit is hit. Put is put. Cost is cost. Hurt is hurt. These do not change at all.
From the learner's perspective, there is no clear system. You have to learn each irregular verb individually, and there are hundreds of commonly used ones.
The good news is that the most irregular verbs are also the most frequently used: go, have, be, do, say, get, make. So you encounter them so often that they become automatic quickly, but the irregularity feels completely arbitrary when you first encounter it.
The third reason English is confusing is its articles, the, a, and an. In many languages, there are no articles at all. In others, articles exist, but they agree with the gender of the noun. In English, there's no gender for nouns, but the rules for when to use the versus a or no article are genuinely complex.
I want a coffee. Indefinite, general. I loved the coffee in that cafe. Specific, already identified. Coffee is good for focus. General, uncountable, no article.
The rules make sense when explained, but the application requires constant judgment about whether something is specific or general, known or unknown, countable or uncountable, and that judgment is genuinely hard to develop.
The fourth reason is phrasal verbs. These are combinations of a verb and a particle, like up, down, on, off, out, in, away, and the meaning of the combination is often completely different from the meaning of the individual words.
Run, look, give, put, take. Simple verbs. But combined with particles, they produce dozens of completely new meanings that you cannot guess from the individual words.
And there are thousands of phrasal verbs in English. English speakers use them constantly in everyday speech. They are unavoidable, and each one must be learned as a whole unit because the meaning does not come from the parts.
The fifth reason is pronunciation. English spelling and pronunciation have a notoriously weak relationship. The same letters can represent different sounds in different words.
The letters O-U-G-H appear in through, rough, though, thought, cough, bow. 6 words, 6 different pronunciations. Same letter combination, completely different sounds.
The letter C can sound like S in city or like K in cat. The combination CH can sound like the ch in cheese or like k in chemistry or like sh in machine.
And the same word can be pronounced differently by British, American, Australian, and Irish English speakers, not to mention the hundreds of regional accents within each country.
Tomato. British speakers say tomato. American speakers often say tomato. Neither is wrong, but learners who learned one variety encounter the other and feel confused.
The sixth reason is that English has so many synonyms. Because of its hybrid nature, English often has multiple words for the same thing, usually one from the Germanic layer and one from the French or Latin layer.
Ask and inquire. Begin and commence. Help and assist. Think and consider. Buy and purchase. End and terminate. Speed up and accelerate. Show and demonstrate.
The Germanic word is usually shorter and more casual. The Latin or French word is usually longer and more formal. Native speakers switch between them depending on register, but learners have to learn twice as many words and also learn which register each belongs to.
The seventh reason is that English has very few endings compared to some languages. Languages like Russian, German, or Spanish change the endings of words to show their grammatical role in the sentence. English has almost lost all of these endings.
This makes English simpler in one way, but it means word order has to do all the work instead. The dog bit the man is very different from the man bit the dog. The same words in different order produce opposite meanings.
And because English relies on word order rather than endings, learners from languages that use endings can find English word order frustratingly rigid in some ways and confusingly flexible in others.
The ninth reason is that English has prepositions. These small words like in, on, at, by, for, with, to, from carry a huge amount of meaning, and their use is often completely idiomatic, meaning you cannot always predict them logically.
Why do we say on time but in time? Why do we say interested in but good at? Why do we say arrive at a place but arrive in a city? Why do we say at night but in the morning? Why do we say by car but on the bus?
These preposition choices are often arbitrary from the perspective of logic. They're just the established usage. You can't always derive the rule. You have to learn each combination.
And that frustrates learners enormously because they want a rule that explains everything, and prepositions often simply don't have one.
Now, let me say something really important. Everything we just described, the inconsistent spelling, the irregular verbs, the articles, the phrasal verbs, the pronunciation, the word order, the prepositions, all of it feels overwhelming when you look at it all at once.
But here's what experienced language learners know. You don't learn it all at once. You never have to face the whole mountain at the same time. You take one step at a time.
You learn the most common irregular verbs first because you'll encounter them every day. You pick up phrasal verbs naturally over time through exposure because they appear in real conversations. You develop a feel for prepositions through reading and listening rather than through memorizing rules.
The inconsistency of spelling becomes less of a problem as you read more because your brain starts to recognize word shapes visually. The articles become more intuitive as you encounter more examples. Pronunciation improves as your ear adjusts.
And here's a thought that I find genuinely comforting. Native English speakers don't know all these rules either. Most English speakers have never heard of the adjective order rule. They just follow it because they absorbed it as children. They can't tell you why they put big before old before round. They just do it naturally.
And you will reach that same place. Not through memorizing every rule, but through enough exposure and use that the patterns become part of your instinct. That's how language works for everyone.
The confusion you feel is a sign that English is impossible or that you're not capable. It's a sign that you're trying to consciously understand a system that native speakers absorbed unconsciously over many years. You're learning explicitly what they learned implicitly.
That's harder in some ways, but it also means you'll understand English more deeply than many native speakers do. You'll know why things work the way they do, and that understanding is a kind of mastery.
Now, let me share something that actually helps with the confusion. Accept that some things in English don't have a neat, logical rule. Some things are just the way they are because of history.
When you accept that and stop searching for a rule that explains everything, you free yourself. You stop fighting the language and start absorbing it.
Learn chunks, phrases, and expressions as whole units, rather than constructing every sentence from scratch using grammar rules. Native speakers don't consciously apply grammar rules. They produce chunks that they've heard and used many times.
The confusion is real. English is genuinely complex, but it's also learnable. Millions of people all over the world speak it fluently as a second language. They went through the same confusion you're experiencing, and they came out the other side.
You will too. The confusion is temporary. The fluency you're building is permanent.
Thank you so much for being here today. We hope understanding why English is confusing helps it feel just a little less confusing.
Keep going, one step at a time, and we'll see you in the next episode.